Call the April Finance Committee for the Flood Diversion Authority to order. And first item of business is roll call.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Costin?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Ms. McCall?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Mr. Gehrig?
Here.
Mr. Redlinger?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney?
Here.
Mr. Grinberg?
Here. Second item, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Move to approve. Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign, motion carries. I asked Briel to make copies of a document that we used earlier this year in the North Dakota Legislature in our testimony in the Senate Appropriations and House Committees. And I just draw a reference to it. As a team, we started with a number of boxes to check, particularly before the North Dakota legislative session. And proud to say that when the legislature adjourns this week, hopefully, what's intact will largely commit and check the box on the bottom. And so credit to everyone involved with this project. We've come a long ways with some big challenges to check these boxes, but everything has started to come together and has come together. As Mr. Shockley shared with me earlier today, he said, just think about the fact that we secured $480 million in less than 6 months. So that's pretty remarkable. That's a credit to everyone's dedication and working hard to see this through. So I just draw that as a point of reference before we get into our agenda, and we'll move to item 3. Approval of the bills. Is that, Kent, you going to run through that, or?
Yeah, the bills that are listed there are $1,006,160, largest being the Cass County Joint Water Resource District reimbursement. The list is attached for your review and approval, and then the attorney's bills to both Dorsey and Onset Twitchell.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
All those, or roll call, I guess, right?
Yep. Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Gehrig?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye. Item 4, financial report. Mr. Costin.
Yes, for the month ending in March, the total expenditures for the 19 fiscal year, $14,724,367, and with a cumulative spend of $468,457,389. I don't have any further comments on that page. The following page, 14, is our statement of net position. That includes $83,765,213. That's available for spending on the project at the current time. And as you proceed through the rest of the report, those are the same formats we've used in the past. I don't have any specific comments on them unless there's questions.
Questions? Hearing none, I believe we have a motion regularly that accepts the report and moves it to the Diversion Authority.
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Just a question. We have some money due from the state, 66.5 from last time and whatever. Is that included in those assets, or do you just wait until the money is put in for cost?
Yeah, we wait until we get reimbursed for that. There is a schedule in this packet that shows the status of the funds, but we draw against those appropriations every month, and as that money goes from the state treasury into our treasury, then it shows up in your statement of net position.
Land management had like $22 million worth of land assets or to buy. Would that come out of that?
That would come out of the $83 million that's currently in your net position. And then we would ask for a reimbursement.
Okay.
And they would turn that around within a few days.
Thank you.
Good question.
Other questions? Going once, going twice. Roll call.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall? Yes. Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Number 5, PMC report.
All right, the overall program status, based on the $2.75 billion 2018 of program budget, actual expenditures to date are $468.5 million, with a remaining $2.3 billion. This gives the breakdown. And then based on the Q1 cash budget, fiscal year 2019 quarter one budget, spent to date as of March 31st, 2019 is $14,724,000. That's based on a, compared to the Q1 cash budget of $8.5 million. Right now, it's an overspend of $6.2 million. A lot of that was based on the land acquisition that went through. This Q1 budget was based on a status quo work, not having anything in place to move forward other than just maintaining what we were doing before. And some of that shifted during that quarter one. That's why there's seems to be like we spent more than what the budget was during the first quarter. And then this is the breakdown. And later on in the agenda, we'll go over the full 2019 fiscal year budget.
Which big picture does cover, you know, our rapid uptick in land acquisition, so it'll right-size itself based on projection, but a quarter budget versus a full year because of the situation we've been in and now we're out of.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Questions? Thank you. Proceed.
Recommended contracting actions.
And I'll take the first one, Kim. Item 6A is one that's in the packet. This is the PMC task order number 2. This is an existing task order that expires at the end of the month. This is simply an amendment to extend services to May 24. We thought it was appropriate, the co-executive directors thought it was appropriate that we spend a bit more time trying to determine what core management services we're going to need and socialize that amongst the various government entities. And so this is a $550,000 amendment to take us through May 24. We're going to talk about task order 5 a little bit later in the agenda, but this is something that's still in development. We thought it was appropriate at this time just to simply extend task order 2 by that period of roughly 3 weeks, a little bit longer than that, to May 24. You'll see that as item number 1.
Questions, comments? Mr. Shockley, you commenting on that, or? Okay. Peterson, do you have a question? No, sir. Look for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
For a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none, I'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Item 6B.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. Before you have amendment or work order number 5, or statement of work number 5 for Ernst and Young Infrastructure Advisors. Currently, their task order has expired. This task order is to provide services through June 1st of 2020. This is in relation to the financial services that we'll be utilizing as we take the information back from the activities that have occurred over the last number of months regarding the federal funding, the state funding. We'll be working up new financial plans, and as we prep to go into the restart of the P3 procurement. And so this is why it's dated June 1st, to run through June 1st, 2020. The services of Ernst & Young are billed as we request them. So while they have a large budget amount, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll use all of it. That's assuming a full P3 startup, which we're proceeding down that road as if we're planning on a full P3 startup. in the next coming months, we'll have some additional task order from Ashurst. And then, has been previously discussed, we'll be working up a task order with Jacobs regarding the P3 procurement also. I can answer any questions. This is very similar to task orders we've had them do in the past. And once again, it's they only perform services when they're requested to perform the services.
Questions for Mr. Shockley? Commissioner Gehrig?
Do we negotiate these, or do they hand us a piece of paper saying, here's what it's gonna cost you per hour?
So the contract is the rate. They've limited the rate increases over the years, and they've actually been very good to work with. They've been our financial advisor since 2015. If we went to a different financial advisor, we'd have a significant startup costs again, and we've also engaged them in the P3 process. And so every time we go through and look at their rates, we make sure that they're not, unusual or out of the ordinary for the market rate.
I don't think you answered. Do we say, no, we'll give you $5.25 for an hour for a senior partner or whatever?
I guess we have looked at their hourly rates every time they submit them to us, and they have not increased them over any unusual amounts than we've seen before. I think the last time they increased them was last year. I don't think between 2018 and 19, we have not seen any increase from them per hour.
So here's the reason I'm asking is we obviously have some money issues with the diversion, right? And I'm seeing this and the next item, or I'm sorry, D, where we're asking for increases, and they're putting in small print at the bottom of this one that they can escalate by 3.5% per year after a certain date. So I think that we are devaluing ourselves. We're not valuing ourselves enough. We're a huge project. We should be getting bang for our buck. People want to work with us because we have a lot of money to spend for many, many years. And I think us paying the market rate is foolish. We should be getting a deal on all these people. And if they don't want to deal with us, we'll go to the next guy, and they'll want that deal. So I'm not approving this if I have no way of knowing that we're getting the best bang for our buck.
Mayor Mahoney?
They've been a very good firm for us, and the computer models they have, John, I don't think we could duplicate without a huge cost to redo that. Every time we modify, different things come along into this thing, and factors that come in here, Ernst & Young has the data. And it's almost like you have all that stuff intrinsically in there. I think they've been competitive in the market, and they've been a great partner for us. And the secondary issue is that when you're out in Bismarck, they like to hear a consistent statement and know that people know what they're talking about. And I think Tony and you have, when we talked to the legislative body, they trust Ernst & Young. So I would be in favor of this motion, and I think we're getting very good rates on that, and do not feel they're overpriced.
Yeah, and also to echo that, the increase, we didn't see any increase from this the last year to coming into this year. And they've also been very good about if there's extra work after hours. I always go over their bills. I always review them and approve them for consistency. There are not a lot of financial advisors in the market that could handle this level of sophistication. And it's just, from my standpoint, we've done our due diligence with our P3 financial team, and it is only when we request the work. And there actually has been times in which they have reduced their cost based upon feeling of value for billing. And so I agree that we have a great project, that people are interested in working on it, and this is why we're able to attract the talent that we have. And Ashurst is another great example. They have kept their hourly rates locked in at the same hourly rate since we first retained them.
It's been moved by Mayor Mahoney. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Gehrig?
No.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye. Item 6C.
This was brought up at the last Finance Committee meeting, and you asked me to bring back some additional information in regard to a justification for a rate increase for Braun Intertek. They have,
Just a
they
moment.
responded,
Are we jumping ahead? Do we do 6C?
sorry, C, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry, I was on D, sorry. Yeah, the work package 50 home demolition, that was an anticipated contracting package. They thought that was going to be bid prior to this meeting. The bid had to be held off because one of the proposers was not able to access one of the sites due to the flooding. So the bidding for that package will now be on May 14th.
Okay, thank you. Now 6D.
Okay, sorry. I was all excited about that one. All right, so, yeah, so at the last Finance Committee meeting, you asked me to bring in some justification for a rate increase for Braun Intertek. Again, Braun Intertek did not have a rate increase. This will be their first rate increase since 2017. It does range between 1% and 3.5%. 3.5% is allowed by their contract. Their justification for the rate increase is that they have increased their employees' wages on an annual basis. There's an increased cost for benefits such as health insurance and also general inflation. So they're asking to be, if you would approve, a rate increase.
Questions for Ms. Daly? Commissioner Garrick?
So what? I mean, things get more expensive. I would like to see numbers on this. I mean, something. We want a 1% to 3% increase because we are, on average, our wages went up this much for these positions. We're going to spend X amount more this year than last year, than 2017, than 2016 on our wages and our benefits. We need to do better or demand more from the people we work with to prove that the costs are going up for them, because the costs are going up for the diversion very rapidly. And again, we have some money issues. We need to deny these things and send a message to all the contractors we're working with. Unless you do a good job of explaining what you're doing, we're not going to give you more money. This is very, very important considering the position that we're in. I move to deny.
Motion dies for lack of second. Further discussion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Commissioner Steen?
Just a quick question. So as I understand, this would be the one increase over a 2-year period. That's all we've
Yes.
had. They not, so it's annually, this is less than 2%.
Yes.
Thank you.
Further discussion?
Rick, I thought for an accountant, you could give us the exact amount for your, 2% or less, huh?
This is just a point for the record.
Thank you.
Mayor, he does it all the time.
Take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick?
No.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. 6E.
All right, co-executive director approved contracting items. There was a change order that was approved for $28,950 for ICS. That was for adding a backup generator and backup switch, or backup breaker box. And there is also a potential, we had on here a potential task order 23 amendment that is still in development.
Mr. Costin?
I had a question with regard to the first one, the 28,950. On page 54, it talks about disagreement between the contractor and the owner, and the fact that they filed a lawsuit against us. Is this essentially an emergency bridge to resolve this issue?
No.
Or will that be negotiated through the final litigation?
So this is separate from the issue that is being considered in the lawsuit. This was another part of the project that was, or another piece of the project that is separate. So we talked to the legal advisors on whether or not we should approve this change order, or whether or not the co-executive director should approve this change order because of that issue, and it came back that yes, they're totally separate. So it seemed to be okay to approve it.
Okay, thank you. It was just difficult to discern when reading the text if it's related directly to this issue or if it's a different. So thank you for that clarification.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick? Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Task order 23. Is that correct? HMD? Or there,
Yeah, that was one that's under development.
okay, potential, okay, gotcha.
Yep.
F, 6F.
I can take that. I handed out to you a supplemental report. It looks like this, should be in front of you all. This is really more of an informational piece. We have the Cass County Joint Water Resource District hiring appraisers to do appraisal work for the project. A month or two ago, we awarded the first 5 appraisal packages, and there was a similar report brought forward to the Land Committee at that point, at sort of the direction of the Finance Committee Chair. And now in front of you, we have additional contract recommendations for appraisal packages 6 through 10. And so really sort of bringing this forward as an awareness item. On the second page, you'll see the specific contract recommendations that will be presented to the Cass County Joint Water Resource District tomorrow morning, the dollar amounts associated with those appraisals. And then on the third page, there's a map showing the location of all the properties that are included in these 5 appraisal packages. So kind of wanted to bring forward for your awareness. We're moving out on more appraisal work. There is some contract actions associated with this that the Cass County Joint District will be considering tomorrow morning.
You will have a busy year.
We are working hard to buy lots of land.
Questions, comments? Mr. Redlinger?
Mr. Chair, just a question really for the committee too, and it's one that we've talked about with the program managers, and that is the kind of level of information and detail that this committee would want to see back in this book of business. And, maybe it's a quarterly report just to give a status. I don't know if it needs to be monthly here. We have the Land Management Committee to really be the workhorse to provide a lot of the oversight to the work, but we just wanted to ask that question too. If members wanted to see this back more regularly, we're happy to do that, but I think that was another part of the discussion heading into today is how much level of detail do you want to see then after we get out in the field and get going?
What are your thoughts, wishes?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Peterson, Commissioner Peterson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think more is more rather than less is more. And I don't know that we have to have a printout every meeting, certainly, but I would like to see distributions regarding in PDF format or something. I guess what I always tell people I work with is I would defer to you dumping as much as you possibly can on me and let me sift through it and find out what I need. Again, we don't need printouts necessarily, but everything electronically you can provide me, I'd be grateful for.
Although we would have no action on that, right, Chad? All we'd do is being informed of what's going on. And I think it was helpful, I think Eric could give us this last thing, there's $22 million worth of acquisitions going on, so there's activity going on. So to me, it's kind of interesting, it's starting to pick up. So to your point, I think we'd see that. Plus, every now and then, those owners walk in and talk to you, and it's nice knowing that something's going on.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to that point, yeah, in case we get blindsided by somebody, we know at least we have a chance to go back and open our email and go to page 47 and say, yes, I understand what you're talking about.
So I'll ask Mike this question. How would that intersect with, following our budget for land acquisition, whether it's this report or regular finance updates?
Right.
So just so that we're in, regular reporting so that we know we're on track with our budget as far as our.
I think that's the question, Mr. Chair, right there is this report I would see as being more of the financial accountability report coming back to this committee. If land management is more the kind of status of who's active, what's going, what's sort of on the table and what we're going to plan for next year, et cetera, I would see that as being more the financial accountability discussion. I think that we need to think about a format to report back to you. I just suggested quarterly, it could be monthly. They would just try to reconcile that so you could see performance to that and make sure that we were consistent with the 2.75. So I think that if that's a desire of the committee, we're happy to work on that. It's just, this is going to be, to the mayor's point, a really big book of business, and we want to make sure that this committee has got eyes on it as well.
Mr. Chairman, heard that, then we would also have monthly updates on budget. So whether it's a quarterly report, we'd also have obviously monthly, so we would know well in advance if we were getting backwards from a budget standpoint.
Mr. Chairman.
So Michael, I might have been lost here, but so two separate reports, one in the land management, one to the budget?
Right, so this would be more the budget and how we're doing on 2.75, the accountability of the overall program.
Would it make sense to combine them?
Could certainly look at that too. I think that, we're going to probably have more detail in the nuts and bolts at land management, but certainly the desire of the committees, whatever the committees would like to see. I tend to agree with Commissioner Peterson. We, the co-executive directors, just feel more information the better, and make sure that it's in the hands of the elected officials so that people can see it and react to it.
And
Did you see the report you had on the 22 million?
Yep.
Is that what you'd like?
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
thanks.
Kent?
At one time, we had looked at a kind of a pixel-based graphical report. Is that still in the works? Because that seemed to be a blend between program management and finance, and it gives a graphical representation of where we're at. So I think it's important to continue that if that's possible.
That is a report that we do produce monthly for the Land Management Committee. And if this group would like to see that, it's already produced and something we could certainly share as information for your packet as well. Really easily done.
It's, Mr. Chair, I agree. I think that's really that level of detail that I think a lot of, as I talk to various board members, I think that's the level of detail that people want to see, and it really makes sense to see it that way. So if that's agreeable to folks, we can certainly start producing that here too.
Thank you.
Ready to move forward? Any other comments, questions? Item 7?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm here to talk a little bit about how the city has gone about developing which projects we've been carrying in town since 2009, why we decided to build those ones, and then of course the costs. Kent will kind of hit on the cost that's been spent to date and what type of assets we have out there. So first, and really to dive into the details, you had to step back all the way to the 2009 flood. So we're all well aware of what happened in 2009 flood. After that, the city developed a comprehensive plan that identified where we would have to complete levees and flood walls up and down the river corridor and the drain systems, with a goal of trying to create a certifiable line of protection based off of what at that time was actually the preliminary FEMA 100-year floodplain, so river stage is 39.3. Now that is, of course, our effective floodplain ever since 2015. So we looked at up and down the river corridor, like I said. On the map you see on the right-hand side, anywhere you see a black line, at that time was areas where the city was trying to construct a levee or flood wall, or identified a need for a levee or flood wall through there. At that time, though, there was really kind of a separate track with the comprehensive plan compared to the diversion. The reason for that was the diversion was just getting going through its study process. There's a lot of uncertainty on the schedule of the project actually moving forward, or was it going to, at that time, be kind of a design, bid, build, and take 20, 30 years or so to get constructed. So the city knew that we had to get as much levees and flood walls constructed as possible at that time. So we really concentrated on the areas that had the most needs during a flood fight, the highest sandbag count, highest clay levee areas, and we're really moving forward with projects in those areas. At that time, this project identified right around $247 million in costs. Those are in 2012 dollars. So then you fast forward a few years to 2016. What changed in 2016 was it became clear that the diversion was going to happen, that the diversion was moving forward with the Corps. The project partnership agreement was signed with the Corps. We received a new start at that time, and we also got a little clear idea of that the project wasn't going to take 20 or 30 years to build. We were going to go through the P3 process, get it built within that 6 to 8 year window. The Corps was also going to accelerate their construction. Also at that time, it was very clear that we weren't going to have funding for both of completing the comprehensive plan as well as the diversion. So the city reallocated what our goal was at that time. City Commission adopted a revised comprehensive plan back in May of 2016, I think it actually was, that really concentrated on buttoning up some neighborhoods that still had those high emergency need areas and making sure that at that time we could safely pass that flow of 35 feet through town. So the areas you see on the map that still had color on them were the areas that we were still concentrating on completing back in 2016 and are actually still working on a few of those today. At that time, you can see the last bullet there, our estimated cost for completing what was known as the revised comprehensive plan was just a little over $100 million in 2016 dollars. So then we accelerate to today. Plan B is what we are all moving forward with. We know that the flow through town is now 37 feet instead of 35 feet that we were working with back in 2016. This continued to confirm that Fargo needs to fully execute our revised comp plans. We're still moving forward with completing all those levees and flood walls. But it also added 6 additional locations that we previously were not working on in getting a line of protection created there. So those areas, including the revised comp plan, are now part of the overall diversions budget of $2.75 billion. The remaining in-town costs of just Fargo's in-town costs is just a little over $126 million in last year's overall budget update. As you can see on the table on the bottom there, though, it's important to note that in addition to Fargo, Moorhead, as well as Cass and Clay County also have costs that need to, costs within the budget that we'll be constructing over the next few years to make sure that both Moorhead can pass the flow of 37 feet through town as well as improve those mobility improvements without or within the county areas or outside of the key cities. So with that, I will turn it over to Kent to kind of hit on the expenditures to date.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. We pulled together a report based upon a request to show the level of effort of funds expended by various agencies for the in-town flood projects. The schedule you see in front of you, the $253 million, is accumulation of just what it shows there, the various stakeholders that had contributed to this. By and large, Fargo was the largest contributor by using its own sales tax, as well as we issued some revenue bonds during the time in the early phases of that, what Nathan explained as the first phase of the comp plan. It was an accelerated spend plan. We basically had to bond our way into that project. So with that, that's why you see revenue bonds listed there. And again, this is all non-diversion related activity. It's a historical summary. So the report the detailed report that I handed out to you all is a 4-page report that lists all of the flood projects by location to the best of our ability, or how it was described in our accounting system, to include levees, flood walls, flood studies, demolition of properties, housing acquisitions, and just a variety of things, all related to the authorization for us using our sales tax and the ability to get to some bonded money to take care of that accelerated spending plan. So it's a $253,306,437 at the bottom of page 4, and we listed the funding sources because I wasn't sure exactly what question I was attempting to answer here based upon the inquiry, but we did our best to show our full level of spend and at a project level, and it is very comprehensive and it's voluminous in nature, the amount of work that the city's done to protect from a flood risk. So in light of the fact we just handed it out, I guess I would ask you to look it over if there's any questions, or if there's any questions right now, I'd be happy to try to answer those. But if there are follow-up questions, feel free to contact us.
Kent, is the State Water Commission, is that a result of the 2015 legislative appropriation?
The State Water Commission has been a result of, the accumulation of past amounts. Some of the first authorizations included money for Fargo to get started on that as well, and there's still money that is due in future allocations from the State Water Commission for in-town levies work. They said they would give us $120 million, and we have drawn the first 60 million, but then they proceeded to allocate the remainder of the 60 million over the next 4 bienniums. And so we'll get that back over time. So long story short, yes, they have appropriated money for this, specifically in that 120, and we have overspent that based upon the need to put in real flood control.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Steen?
Just a clarification, because we've looked at this in the past, but the revenue bonds, 115 million, those were issued to pay for some of this debt, but now, as I understand, I want to be clear on this, that the diversion authority has picked that up, but they've also got the 1.5 or 1.25% sales proceeds to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, I could walk you through the bond amount, because that's probably somewhat higher than what we've talked about in the past. The very first bond issue we did was for $25 million, and that was to fund the kickoff of housing acquisitions. And at the time we scoped that term of that bond issue, we had no idea where this flood control projects were going. So we put it on a 5-year term. We thought, well, we're gonna spend for at least 5 years until this matures. And so that first bond issue was paid off, and the remaining 2 bond issues, the second phase of the original comp plan, and I think going into the 3rd year of the initial comp plan, we issued bonds on that as well. And so there's 2 bond issues outstanding, and that was being paid for by the City of Fargo sales tax at the time. And during the evolution of the financial plan, the city and everybody agreed that we would roll our share of the sales tax into the diversion bucket, if you will. But along with that, we agreed to pay the debt, because you can't take the cash and leave us with the debt. So that's how we got to where we're at today. And so part of what that sales tax is paying for those bonds on a subset of these projects.
Right. Okay.
Further comments? Nathan, further comments from you?
Tony, just
Information, all right. Moving on then
So-
to item 8.
So when you're talking about the $468 million spent on flood control so far, this 253 is part of that?
That is not part of that. That is the city's lift to do non-diversion related flood control.
So the 468 we saw in our packet today, you would add this to it, so we've spent 750
Yes,
million.
yes. I mean, it's managed by the city, the in-town levy, and the diversion is managed by the diversion and the bucket of money that's been appropriated for that project.
Kent, I'm not sure if that's fully true. I think that's both. I think the 468 is including the 253.
Yeah, as a point of clarification, all of that bond money was local money, and we had to spend that because the bond proceeds were dedicated to the project, so we did spend that. I would maintain that the 468 you're looking at in your packet is money that the diversion has expended for the diversion project, and just near the end of the year, we started turning in those costs because we have forwarded all that money into the diversion bucket. But this is a historical summary of past costs funded either by bond issues by the city of Fargo and with some contribution from others. And so I would suggest it's in addition to.
I'll let you guys figure that out, but one of the things I was going to add to this is then the work that's done by the Corps on the inlet and then Wild Rice, the 46 million plus the 35 million, that's not in our costs at all, right?
That's not in the numbers that we're showing.
We haven't. And then any work Moorhead has on their side, now the additional 4 million they've gotten and any money they get here forward, that will then start to go into the costs?
That would go to pay for their $40 million they have to do for their in-town works. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving to item 8. Thank you, Nathan.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. Just wanted to give you an update on the County Road 1617 reimbursement. The Cass County Highway Department will be opening bids tomorrow for the paving of Highway 17. That is scheduled for, following the bid opening, scheduled for action by the County Commission at our first meeting in May 6th, and look to complete that project by mid-June. So that will be down at that point, and then the county would look for diversion authority reimbursement following that. The engineer estimate on the cost of that is at about $250,000, and have our fingers crossed that so far we've been getting some pretty competitive bids compared to our engineer estimate, and we hope that holds.
Questions? We talked about this last fall, correct?
Correct.
Finally catching up to it. That's my understanding. Senator Kramer pointed that out. We met with him in Washington in February as well, just for the record. He will appreciate it as a former resident of Kindred. Further questions, comments? Thank you. Item 9, is that Mr. Redlinger?
Kim will be taking that item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Paul's going to take it. I'm just going to
I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Paul Barthel. For some of those who don't know me, I'm work with Jacobs Engineering, and I will hope to walk you through the proposed full budget for 2019. The interim budget that was approved previously was for the $8.5 million, and that's what we've been basing our reports off of up until this date. Now that we have had some updates into the status of the program, we felt it was best to move forward and kind of walk through the rest and present to you for your approval the budget for the remainder of the year. So what's in front of you is the roll-up for 2019 cash budget for this year. We're looking at $162.7 million for this year. That does include expenditures to date, and $8.5 million is also, this is not on top of the $8.5 million. This includes that level also. So that's probably the biggest difference. Full year paid to date is the $14.7 million that we've already spent. That was in our previous report. So we're looking at a remaining budget for 2019 as just under $148 million on that. Broken down, that is one of the big spends in there. You'll notice the land acquisition at an additional almost $60 million, $59.2 million for continued work and acquiring lands. That directive was back in January, when we expressed the desire to go ahead and start purchasing lands. And Eric and his team have been, as you saw earlier, have been going strong with their lands and working hard on that. Let me walk through this kind of section by section. The first section is with about $14.5 million left to spend in 2019 is for the management and diversion, for the actual diversion channel. And some of the aspects of that include the technical review by the technical team from HMG. It also includes the Ernst & Young dollars that you previously approved for their financial evaluation of things. It also includes legal review by both Ashurst and Onsted Twitchell. And then it also includes the P3 effort by Jacobs and A2S. Southern Embankment Infrastructure is just some additional funding that we see happening with the wild rice, and a lot of the funds that you see there is design funds for the Corps of Engineers that we've included in the budget as they are planning and now have the ability to do the work on the wild rice and then also on the inlet structure itself too. There is a Work Plan 50 Phase 2 demo in there. That is the project that is currently out for bid and that we're waiting for the bids to come in at the next meeting. So that is to cover that. In-town flood protection, the WP 42 in-town levies, that is actually the cost to cover the current ongoing construction that is south of town, work package 42E. And then the complementary in-town flood protection by the city of Fargo and others, the city of Moorhead. So there's an additional $36 million to cover what Nathan just outlined, what their expected spend is for this next year in 2019. A small amount of enabling work, which was the Cass County. That's our estimate for the 16-17 roadway and bridge work that could potentially be incorporated in the Corps of Engineers work at the inlet structure. Then we get into the land acquisition, and a lot of it is based on the diversion channel, purchasing that. Our goal is to have the entire footprint of the channel purchased by April of 2020, so that if the diversion and the P3 gets going, that land is available for the developer in May or June of 2020, so that there could be potential of construction starting that summer if the schedule is met.
Paul, would you?
Yes.
Deer in the headlights for me. What's the golf club thing?
That's some finalization of some contracts that we've had already down there, and it's the closeout of the contracts that we've agreed to already.
Thanks for clarifying, because in my mind, we cleared that last year.
Right.
Catching up.
They've been working and building, and so we haven't received the final bill yet, is basically what that is.
Thank you.
Engineering design fees are pretty much what that is. Looking at Plan B, new models along those lines, any other additional work that we need to do along for engineering throughout the year. Program management, that and information, so that not only includes the Jacobs and the AE2S dollars, but there's legal fees for both the Cass County Joint Rural District, their legal fees, and then also the legal fees for the Diversion Authority, so both Dorsey and Onstead Twitchell are included in there. And then contingency. There is no contingency budgeted in that. That was one thing that we heard loud and clear from the committee and from the chair, that this committee owns the contingency that we put into our budget. And so any further contingency that we place in there will be brought before the board and the finance committee. So I know I whipped through that very quickly. Are there any questions that you might have?
Commissioner Steen.
I have two questions. One with regard to the core work, and I went to the meeting last week with the general here and that type of thing. And I was under the impression it was going to be a substantial amount of work completed this year on the inlet structure and some other pieces. Did I miss something there? Was that next year? And I'm trying to figure out where that would fit in this current year budget, or we don't see that, or how does that work? Because those costs are in our total project cost, right?
Correct. Okay. The work that they are completing this year has already been under contract, so they'll continue to go forward on that. The funds that it is part of the federal funding on this, and so it's basically money in, money out. In that sense,
but the money in, the money out piece is in our total project budget.
It's total project cost.
Right. So if it's money in, money out, shouldn't we be seeing the money out portion that we're expending this year if it's part of the project cost?
It's, the federal government, they will cut the checks to the contractor. We need to make sure that we are monitoring and against the 2.75 number, but it does not pass through our books in a sense that we don't have to write the check for it.
So this is
I may have
our little
misspoke.
pocketbook cash budget. What happens between the Corps and the contractors is off our books, but it'll be recorded and brought into. So this number may, when we see a project cost here of a total budget amount of 162 million, it could be substantially more than that as far as project cost expenditures.
Correct, because
So
you
right
will
there.
add in the Corps on top of that. They will have their expenditures, but we will track that. As we go through this cash budget, and if you look at our program costs, that still rolls up to the 2.75. And so as you look in the associated work, the southern embankment, that 118 million from there, actual cost to date is now 0. Well, that's the contingency. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong line here. So the southern embankment associated, the 585, 53 spent to date, remaining program budget, that's where you will see that it's tracked through there. So that's where it rolls up to the 2.75. So this is what we're talking through, and I'm sorry I didn't explain this as clearly as I should have. It's the cash budget. So what the diversion authority is basically paying for writing checks for.
Mr. Montplaisir.
A couple of years ago, we paid the Corps, I think it was roughly $50 million, Kent, for the inlet structure. So they've gotten the cash from us, so that money that they're now going to be spending, they've already gotten from us.
Okay. Some of the money, yeah. Okay.
So Mike, when they get the money for it, do they give it back to us?
That's our contribution to their costs.
At the end, we might get some money back, is that correct?
I would assume only if the whole inlet southern piece is less than what was originally estimated.
Well, I was under the impression at the end of the project, if there's some money left, then it comes back to us.
A little bit.
I believe that's probably true, but.
Mr. Shockley's got the answer.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I may be able to shed some light on that. So the local contribution is held in an account that is being spent down by the Corps. As they obtain funding from the federal government, they will use the federal funding first before they pull from the local share. So there will be, my understanding in my last conversation with Terry Williams about this is that as the federal, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but I believe there was an appropriation for 35 million from the work plan. They will use that 35 million for the gated inlet, and then they'll use additional funds for start on the wild rice inlet. And so as they draw down the federal funds, once that reaches 0, they start drawing down the local match of 5%. And they just continue that through the process until the local match is completely spent down. So we had discussed the possibility if they were going to send the check back to the diversion authority, or if they were going to keep that in escrow fund and just continue that spend down. So I think they're going to land at the point of which they'll spend the federal funds first and use ours as supplemental funds to keep the projects rolling, because just like with every other federal project, you might get 35 one year and 90 the next, and it helps to balance out that construction cycle.
So they couldn't put the 50 million in the market, John, and get a little extra and then?
I can ask them that question. I don't know the answer to it. So.
Any more questions for Paul? Are you completed?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Your second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick? Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Aye, excuse me. Next up, Eric, are you doing land acquisition?
I believe you have in front of you a land acquisition directive. This is a fairly standard approach where we ask the Finance Committee to direct the Cass County Water Resource District to go ahead with starting the process of acquiring parcels. The map and the parcels listed in that land acquisition directive are primarily properties in the upstream area that have reached out and asked to begin the process. And so we've had a mass mailing back in February, and since that time, there's been a number of phone calls and meetings and visits with individual property owners, as well as some group meetings at townships. And as a result of that, we have a group of property owners that are interested in moving forward with the process. And so we ask the Finance Committee to approve that directive. If you do so, we will bring it to the Water Resource District Board tomorrow morning for processing and get the process underway, which starts with appraisals. So.
Questions? Is there a motion? Kent?
I had a question. Is this the final handoff from the Finance Committee to the Land Acquisition Committee? So we would not see any of this detail again?
Yeah, well, we just talked earlier in this meeting about kind of a routine status reporting that we'll provide to this committee, but this is sort of the green light, giving the Water Resource District the authority to go ahead and start the process acquiring the property rights on these parcels. I guess the process is to hand that ball to the Water Resource District, and then they get the job done.
Commissioner Garrick?
Move to approve.
For a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I did have a follow-on question, and this is just for clarity in my own mind. On the map, on the left side of the map, appears to be three sections of land listed there. And Eric and I talked about that before, and my question is basically there's a plan of land acquisition, but are there any policies that would be linked to the Finance Committee about how to manage ad hoc requests? So, in other words, from what I discerned this morning, the landowner has a desire to sell his land. 5032, 5037, and 5038 on the map. How much of that land do we actually need? And it's my understanding we need to acquire the land to get the easements, the flowage easements, but I'm not familiar with that process. So Eric, it may be helpful to understand how that's going to work. You're either going to buy them out and resell later, or you're simply not going to buy them out at their request.
So on those specific parcels, we need an easement. The property owner also owns a farmstead. You can see, I guess if you zoom in on that map, there's a small farmstead that we need to acquire that farmstead. The land associated with that, there is a portion of those lands that we need to buy an easement on. It's been our practice and previous policies, I believe, is if a property owner is wanting to sell more than what we need, we use that tool in our toolbox to buy what they're willing to sell. At some point in time, then we will attach the easement to the parcel, sell off the other property rights, and remain with what we need. And so you're right that there is a cash flow issue if we're buying more than what is needed in the near term, but it's, I guess, our intention to work that cash flow out through the course of time, and we'll have to obviously keep monitoring that pretty quickly, or pretty actively.
So how long are you planning to hold the property before you go out on the market to
I don't think
resell?
there's been any real decisions on that. We have disposed of one, I guess, area of land a couple years ago that we had acquired, similar situation, and I think there was a lot of debate about whether it was too early to sell it off or not. I think in many of these situations, we'll probably want to wait until the design is final, and know with more certainty that we don't need any of the excess lands. And I guess, that project, or that process of the design will continue. We're waiting for the P3 developer to give the final design along the channel. The Corps will do the final design along the southern embankment. And we're working with the FEMA group on model review, as well as permitting agencies on the upstream area, defining exactly where we need the final lands. So I think that's sort of an evolving process.
Other comments, questions? Take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Number 11.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I think we briefly covered Task Order 5. That will be our core program management task order that's in development now. We'll be working with the Finance Committee in May and the Diversion Board in May for approval on that, as well as Task Order 6. That timeline will be, John, in June. Can you just help me with that? That will not be in May. I'll just ask John for a little help.
Correct. It'll be probably be previewed in June with approval in July. As part of our plan moving forward, we would intend, now that the legislative session is done, we'll have a meeting with the financial team and the technical team, take back all the information over the next 30 to 60 days and develop what our program management for the P3 and the project implementation will look like.
Thanks, John. So that's just information, no action requested, Mr. Chair.
Other business? Mayor Mahoney?
I would just like to thank John Shockley and Tony Grenberg for all the hard work they did with the legislative team this year, and hoping that with those good relationships they have now, that next term we can get the rest of the money we need. But it's really true, when you started out, we were short from the Fed, short from Minnesota, short from everybody, and we got all but one goal done, and I think that's a tremendous, because of the tremendous work you both did, so, and all the people that worked with you on it. And Mike, you did some work on this as well, so I appreciate you turning to the dark side, came over to North Dakota and helped us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Mahoney. I have the sense that Mr. Shockley's going to want to run for the legislature. Mary?
Yes, I think, Mary, did I hear you, the seating
Yeah,
inquiry that we talked about?
I have that on my list.
Yep.
So if you were in the room before Lands adjourned, there was a discussion about format of our meeting structure from this location versus a rectangle table on the floor. My sense was Outreach and Lands prefer to be on the floor. What are your comments or thoughts on? Because the primary factor here is that we can't be moving back and forth with technology. We have to have everything set up in one place, particularly on Wednesday meetings. So if two of the three already say yes, I would imagine that they get the votes. But Commissioner Steen?
As I commented earlier, I'd be much more in favor of on the floor, more of a discussion, arrangement versus, like somebody else said, speaking to nobody in the audience in reality.
Hearing no objections.
This is bulletproof, so.
And we did have a little alert like 2 weeks ago, so we'll go consistent with Wednesday meetings. Next meeting is May 22nd. Any other comments, questions, requests?
Move to adjourn.